Hey everybody, my name is Asia and welcome back to my channel. And even though I'm smiling today, we're actually going to be talking about my worst and most disappointing books of 2023. So honestly, I'm never a person that has that many worst books of the year. I feel like I'm really good at picking up books that I actually enjoy, or maybe I'm just easily pleased. Regardless, I enjoy a lot of the books that I read every single year, but every year I do have a handful of worst and most disappointing books. So today we're going to be going over my top 10, my 5 most disappointing, and my 5 worst books of the year, because why not have a little bit of hatred this year? You know what I'm saying? A little bit of Grinch energy. I love the Grinch. He is an icon to me, and you know, we're bringing that energy into this video. I do want to say one of the most important things to me is that I'm entertained. So a lot of the books that I find the worst or the most disappointing are books that were boring to me. So you will probably hear that repeated throughout this video multiple times where I'm just be like, this book was boring, but you know what? That's just my opinion.
That's my opinion!
If I feel that it was boring, I'm gonna tell y'all that it was boring so y'all know these books are boring books. I'm gonna save my worst book for the very end because I do have a worst book of the year that I actively hated. Usually every single year I don't have a book that I hated, just a book that I disliked. This year I had a book that I hated, so I'm gonna save that for the very end. But first we're gonna start off with my most disappointing books, and so coming in first is Pen Pal by Dathan Arkovich. I was really excited for this one because so many of my friends love this one, say it's like one of the best books that they've read. I've seen it on favorites list. I've seen it just beloved on BookTube. So I thought, you know, of course, if everybody else loves it, that I'm gonna love it too. And unfortunately, that was just not the case. This one follows a man as he is looking back at different memories in his childhood and noticing just some weird, strange things that have occurred throughout his life. And this one I just found really boring. As I said, that is a very common thing with me with disappointing and worst books, is that I found it boring. And this one I definitely found really boring because not much happened. The beginning of the book and the end of the book are very much similar in how much information that we know, and I feel like there was nothing added to the story. This one was originally a creepypasta, and I feel like I could definitely get that vibe, but I would rather have read it as a creepypasta or as a short story than as a full-length book, because I feel like most creepypastas, they may be creepy throughout the beginning and the middle, but towards the end of the story you really don't find out much. There's not much revelation. It's just like a creepy little story. And this one, because it was 250 pages of just creepiness and eeriness with not much payoff in the end, I felt like dissatisfied and I felt a little bored because of course it was a little creepy, it was a little eerie, but I still just felt dissatisfied by the end of the story because I wanted to know something. I wanted to know what was going on, and we never got that resolution. So it just felt like I read 250 pages of creepiness for absolutely no reason. By the end of the story I was like, what was the reason? What was the point?
What was the reason? What was the reason? What was the reason?
There was none. That's the answer. Next up, another one that was really disappointing for me was Out There Screaming, edited by Jordan Peele. I was so excited for this one because Jordan Peele, obviously we know him as a very famous director who directs really amazing movies. I'm not the biggest fan of all of his movies, but I can appreciate like what he does directorially and how, you know, he's made such an impact and a splash within the directing horror movie genre. And so I was really excited for this one because especially because it had some really big horror names of Black authors within this title. I was really excited to try it out, and I actually have a whole reading vlog for this one on my Patreon where I read and ranked every single story and I talk about each story individually. But I just remember kind of being sad because this one wasn't as horror as I wanted it to be, and I think that there obviously is some discussion that needs to be had around the nuance of horror, specifically related to Black people, and how a lot of things can be deemed as not horror because they are not seen as horrific as for white audiences, but for Black audiences or for audiences of color, it can be really horrific and horrible. And a lot of the stories within this didn't even have that. A lot of the stories were not necessarily race focused at all, just a lot of them were not really horror to me at all, and that was really disappointing for me. I think I gave this one 3 stars overall, so it really was not a bad book. And if you're looking for a short story collection to read by Black authors to try out their different reading tastes, I would still recommend this one. But for me, it was just overall super disappointing, and I wish that I gotten more from the story. Another boring one to me was episode 13 by Craig DeLuey. I was so highly anticipating this one because even though I don't like paranormal horror in general. I don't really like it in movies. I don't really like it in TV shows. I don't really like it in books, but I do enjoy a found footage story. And I mostly have seen it in movies, the found footage element, and even though as I said, paranormal is not my favorite, I do enjoy a paranormal found footage movie. And so I was really excited for this one because I thought, I haven't really read that many found footage books. I had another really disappointing one earlier this year that I'll talk about later. That's actually one of my worst books. So I was like, okay, I'm really excited to try this one out. And while I did enjoy the found footage elements, this one dragged. It was so boring and it just dragged on and on and on and on. Not much happened. And I was also really anticipating this one because I love Suffer the Children by this same author, and it was one of my favorite books and one of my first horror books that I've ever read and really enjoyed. So I was really just looking forward to this one, and again, it was just super long for what the story was, and I didn't really necessarily enjoy the direction that it went in towards the end. I've read something similar, or I've seen similar things in movies is what I meant to say, so I thought that I would enjoy kind of this ending, but it just kind of didn't really pay off for me because the rest of the story was so boring. And like, even though like Pen Pal, for example, had a lot of creepy and eeriness throughout the story, I feel like this one didn't even have that. Not much creepiness or eeriness happened throughout the story. Very little things happened, but not much at all. So I was like, again, what was the point? Why did I read this book? Why was it so long? It was like 400 pages for no reason. And like the end did have a little bit more payoff, but I feel like the middle of the story just kind of dragged and there was not much that happened. I felt so bored throughout the entire story because I was like, okay, when is something paranormal gonna happen? When is something big gonna happen? When is something super creepy gonna happen? And I feel like I just never got that throughout this book. Next up is Manhunt, and this one I was really anticipating as well because it's a queer horror book and I love queer horror in general, but I should have known that this one was not going to be for me because it is apocalyptic, and I do not like apocalyptic stories at all. They're definitely not for me. I don't enjoy them generally in any format at all. I have enjoyed a couple apocalyptic horror books, but they've been kind of untraditional apocalypses, like Suffer the Children by Craig DeLuey. I haven't really enjoyed many like full apocalypse books, and this one is definitely more like apocalyptic, and that's just like not for me. And I felt like this one, there was a lot of just like surviving and like just like discovering things out about the world, and I was like, okay, so why are we just hearing about people surviving in the wilderness and like trying to make it through? And like, that's completely fine, but it's just not for me. And so I was really disappointed because I know some like drag queens really love this book. I've heard some really good Own Voices reviews about this book, but it just really was like a letdown for me. And my last disappointing book of the year was Broken Dolls by McKay Watson. I love Them by McKay. I think it's going to be on my favorites of the year, so you guys should definitely wait to check out that video. And I love Them so much because even though it was like this super gratuitous horror that was disgusting, Them literally made me throw up. This one I feel like did not have the same level of commentary that the first one had. The gratuitous horror was there for a reason. It was there for a purpose, and I didn't get a reason or purpose for the horror in this story at all. It just really was like, okay, I'm reading about these disgusting things happening to mostly children and like sexual things happening to children, which I find extremely disgusting and horrific, of course, but it made me feel gross, and not in like a hee hee ha ha kind of way, in like a I don't know about this kind of way, because there was no commentary to me. I've heard some people say that they believe that there was some commentary throughout the story, which is great and amazing for them. I just didn't really get that at all, and it felt like it was kind of like pointless. It was like giving like torture porn of just children doing sexual things and going through horrific things with no like reason or purpose. So I really just wish that there was more commentary woven into this story like how it was in Them, but I will definitely still be reading from McKay in the future, and I will be trying out the rest of his work. There was also a lot of violence towards women in this story, and while again there was that in Them as well, I feel like in Them it was done kind of with a level of compassion, and it was done for a reason, while in this one it just didn't seem like that was there. Now moving on to my worst books of the year, I actually have a romance on this list, and that is Practice Makes Perfect by Sarah Adams. This one is just like a little romance that follows a florist and a like bodyguard, and I thought that I would really enjoy this one because I was really looking forward to reading the first one in this series early on, and I read this one for a video. So I never read the first one, but I ended up reading this one. This is the second one in the series, and this one was such a letdown for me because it literally was giving pick me so hard. Both of them were giving pick me. It was giving like the Dollar General version of Rory Gilmore and Jess from Gilmore Girls. It just was not giving to me at all. And I do want to talk about just kind of like a nuance of this story where the main character, a big thing throughout her plot line is that she believes like everybody kind of paints her as this very innocent person because she lives in a small town, and like with her family, her parents have passed away, but she's kind of like raised by the town, similar to Rory in Gilmore Girls. The town is very close knit, and they all kind of paint her as innocent, and so do her siblings, and they paint her as just like this innocent little person, and that annoys her. And like, I'm not saying that that's not annoying, and I'm not saying that's not harmful to an individual, but that's also a privilege. As someone who is Black, who has been over sexualized throughout basically my entire life, and that is a very common experience for Black people, specifically Black women, where they are over sexualized throughout their entire life, and that is very much like an institutional issue that has been going on for a very long time, and that is a problem. It is a very big issue. And so I'm not saying again that being deemed innocent and being seen as just like kind of like this innocent little person when you're a grown adult, I'm not saying that's not annoying, but that's also a privilege, and I wish that that was kind of recognized throughout this story. I feel like that's not something that people would necessarily think of, and again, that's also a problem where people don't really see these really nuanced issues that happen to Black women specifically. And I wish that people did recognize their privilege and how just because something is seen as annoying or deemed not necessarily desirable, it doesn't mean that you don't have privilege. And I just wish that people recognize their privilege more often, because this character was definitely very privileged in the fact that she was not over sexualized ever, and the harm that comes with that is very real, and that's not recognized throughout this story. And there's also no smut, and I'm saying like not every story has to have smut for me, but if you're not gonna have smut, I needed to have some emotionalness. I needed to have a little something to it, and this one did not have that. It definitely didn't really at all. So I wish that it just like had a little bit more emotional impact for me as well. Next up, I have The Trap by Catherine Ryan Howard. This is another one that I read, I think actually for my TBR jar, or it was actually for my TBR spinner wheel, but it was a punishment. And this one, to say the least, was actually a punishment because this book was so boring, but then also ridiculous at the same time. The main character in this, she was so unbelievably unlikable, and she was so unbelievably stupid. And I'm not saying that I have to like every single character, but I am a character driven reader. So even if a character is unlikable, I need them to have some complexity, some nuance to their character, and she did not have any of that. She was just incredibly stupid and made so many stupid decisions. And a lot of the side characters were also super annoying and just like unbelievably unlikable. And I wish that we had a couple more perspectives throughout this story, because there were some really horrible twists throughout this story. I will say they're very horrible, but I feel like if we gotten some of the side characters' perspectives, that we would have like been able to believe the twist, and the twist would have been done and more executed better if we were able to have their perspectives throughout it. But then also the twists were like horrible. I hated the twists throughout this story, and they were just very odd and like unusual. Like I was like, okay, like what was the point? And they did take me off guard, I will say that, and maybe that was the point. And generally, if a twist surprised me, I'm like, okay, 5 stars, 4 stars at the very minimum. But even though these surprised me, I just was like, okay, like really, like that's what we're doing here? It just like the main character was just like so stupid that it was just unbelievable. I'm like, I didn't know that somebody could be so incredibly dumb. Like maybe there are that people that are that dumb in this world, but I would like really hope not. Okay, next up is A Twisted Love Story, and originally this one I did not hate because it was like entertaining to a extent, but it was terrible, guys. So this one is supposed to be about a really toxic relationship, and I just can't get over it, because even though it was supposed to be deemed toxic, I was like, this is the toxicity that we're going for, like this is really it. And so basically, like, the toxic things that would happen in this romantic relationship would be like, she would be like, okay, he doesn't eat meat, so I'm gonna order a steak, and like that's gonna bother him. Or like, he hates this color blue, so I'm gonna wear this color blue dress. Like, girl, I wanted this to be so toxic that it was ridiculous. I wanted it to be outlandish. I wanted it to be so ridiculous that they took like the person's grandmother's ashes and baked it into food and served it to them. I wanted like Cardi B invasion of privacy level of toxicity. I want to break up all your shit. Call your mama phone, let her know that she raised a bitch, then dial tone click. That's what I wanted. And this did not give that, okay? It just gave like white people just doing like random petty white people shit to each other. And like, I was like, okay, so maybe at least like there was supposed to be like a murder that happened back in the day that like was supposed to be like so like crazy and like, and spoiler alert, everything that happened in the story, all the murders, everything were an accident. Everything was an accident. Nobody had any sort of malice or malicious intent throughout this story. I wanted somebody to be malicious. I wanted toxicity. I wanted that. And nobody was malicious. Everything that they did was petty and stupid and like little small insignificant things that should not even be bothering people. And then everything else was an accident. And I was like, what was the point? What was the point of reading this story? There was none. That's my answer to all of this. What was the point of reading this story? There was none. Okay, we're getting into the top 2. So my second least favorite book that I read this entire year was Road of Bones. And this one is another found footage story that I thought that I was going to enjoy. It's supposed to take place in the Arctic Circle and follow like a camera crew as they are, you know, trying to figure out some history in this like place and like look into like the lore, because there was like this town and something happened to this town. I can't even remember, but I felt like this story dragged on so much. It was 250 pages of nothing. This wasn't scary at all. This had nothing scary within it at all. And I was like, what is going on? I will say the only good thing about this book is that it had like this really cold atmosphere. So if you're looking for a book that's just going to describe coldness over and over and over and over and over and over and over again so much that it drags, this is going to be the book for you. But it just had nothing going on. And towards the end, there was like a twist at the end, and I hated it. I was like, okay, so that's the direction that we're going in. Really? This is it? After all this dragging on and on, this is what we're going to be doing. This is not even horror. This is just like some weird fantasy, magical realism. I wanted horror. I wanted to be scared. I wanted some really scary, like isolated, snowy vibes, and this just did not deliver. And my least favorite book of the entire year was The Deep by Nick Cutter. I hated this book. It was absolutely completely horrific. This book I was like super excited for because one, I love ocean horror. I love it so much. It's one of my favorite subgenres, and I feel like there's not enough ocean horror that's published. I definitely wish that there was more. And this one, just like, I was excited for that. And then I also really enjoyed The Troop by this author because I read it a couple years ago, and this one just did not give at all. So this book was incredibly stupid. I hated the end. I've never read an ending of a book that I hated more than I hated this one. It was so stupid, and I feel like this author like abandoned so many ideas. Like there was a whole pandemic throughout this story that barely had anything to do with the story at all, and I was like, okay, so where is this plotline going? Like you could have made it completely different or just not included that, and you added this in for what reason? There was no reason. And also, as I said, I really wanted there to be like some really horrific ocean horror, and this could have been set in any isolated setting. It could have been set in a treehouse in the middle of the Amazon. It could have been set in space. It could have been set anywhere, and it really did not take use of this really horrific atmosphere that could have been created from this setting. It really just did not use it at all, and so I really just wish that it took use more of the setting. There was a discussion around trauma throughout the story as well, and it just felt so forced. I was actually reading some Goodreads reviews, and someone described it really well. They said like, hey, your brother wants you to go down to a C-Lab thing. He needs your help. Ahaha, my brother, he doesn't need me. He never needed me. Here are several chapters about my relationship with my brother. See my past and my dysfunctional sibling relationship? Yeah, my brother. Let's go down to the ocean and check out his experiments and learn more about stuff that isn't interesting. I love boring sciencey stuff in horror. I really do. Like Into the Drowning Deep, that's why my mom didn't love that book, because she was like, okay, why is there all this sciencey jargon, just randomness in this story? I love it, but that's not even what this was. This was not even like boring sciencey stuff. This didn't even go like sciencey. It just like I can't even describe how much I hated this book. It was just awful. It was a horrible reading experience, and I wish I never wasted my time. So those are all my worst and disappointing books of this year. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I really have fun doing this video every single year, even though I'm not much of a hater when it comes to books. I'm a much bigger hater of other things, but books I just love so much, so I'm not really much of a hater. If you made it to the end, leave the little thumbs down emoji down below because we don't like these books, and I will see y'all in my next one. Bye, everybody.